step back into 1960s Canada, a time when life tasted different. From corner store snacks to homemade classics, we're uncovering the forgotten foods that shaped an entire generation. These are the flavors that vanished, the treats only true 60s Canadian kids remember it. Simple, comforting, and gone forever. Let's open the time capsule. Hostess Hickory Sticks, the original 1960s recipe. If you were a Canadian kid in the 1960s, you remember the smell before anything else. The moment you tore open that thick Hostess bag, a wave of deep, smoky hickory hit your face. The kind of scent that clung to your fingers long after the bag was empty. The original recipe was nothing like today's version. The sticks were thicker, oilier, uneven, and impossibly crunchy. Some pieces were dark and extra smoky, the ones all the kids fought over. Corner stores kept them stacked in sun-warmed boxes by the counter. And for just 15 cents, you could grab a bag on your walk home from school. You'd open it before you even made it out the door, wiping your greasy fingers on your jeans as you shared handfuls with friends. The flavor was heavy, rich, almost campfire-like. It felt like childhood, and when the recipe changed, something changed with it. Modern hickory sticks are good, but they're a lighter echo of what we had. Only true 1960s kids remember that original smoky punch that could never be recreated. It wasn't just a snack. It was a memory you could taste. Laura Secord Ice Cream Bars, 1960s, original version. If you grew up in 1960s Canada, you remember the weight of a Laura Secord ice cream bar in your hand. It felt solid, dense, like real ice cream instead of the airy frozen blends we get today. The moment you peeled back the waxy paper wrapper, a chill ran across your fingertips, and the sweet smell of real cream hit you instantly. These bars melted slowly, so slowly, that a single one could last the entire walk back from the corner store on a hot July day. Laura Secord shops were tiny treasure boxes back then. Wooden shelves, shiny glass counters, and a bell that chimed every time a kid walked in. The ice cream freezers hummed in the corner, fogging up the glass as you leaned in to choose your flavor. Chocolate fudge, maple walnut, butter pecan flavors that tasted richer, deeper, made with real ingredients from a time before shortcuts. Biting into one felt like breaking into a frozen brick of pure nostalgia. The chocolate coating cracked loudly, sending tiny shards down your shirt, and the inside was so creamy it stuck to the roof of your mouth. You'd sit on a porch step or a patch of grass, letting the bar drip down your fingers as the sun warmed your face. And you always tried to finish it before the neighborhood kids asked for a bite. By the late 1970s, the formula changed. Lighter, faster, melting, and slowly, those original Barza, real ones, faded into memory. Only 1960s kids truly remember how they tasted cold, rich, and impossibly satisfying. It wasn't just ice cream. It was summer in Arapahoe, Dominion's in-store bakery pies, a taste of 1960s Canada. If your family shopped at Dominion in the 1960s, you remember the smell before you even reached the bakery. Warm apple, cinnamon, butter, raisins, and flaky crust all mixing together in the air so rich and sweet, it practically pulled you down the aisle. Dominion didn't just sell pies back then. They baked them fresh early every morning, filling the entire store with a smell that felt like home. The pies came in simple, cardboard boxes with thin cotton string tied around the top. Every kid knew the feeling of carrying one to the car still warm through the box, the bottom leaving a faint grease mark on your hands. Sunday dinners, holidays, visits from grandparents, Dominion pies appeared at every meaningful family moment. Apple, raisin, cherry, blueberry each, sliced steaming as you cut into it. The filling bubbling just a little, you'd get home, and your mom would place the pie on the counter to cool, the smell drifting through the whole house. Sometimes you'd sneak a tiny fingerful of crust from the edge, hoping no one would notice. The pastry was dense, buttery, heavy, in the best way. Nothing like the machine-made crusts today. When Dominion disappeared, it wasn't just a store that vanished. It was a ritual, a scent, a comfort. Those pies belonged to an era when food felt slower, simpler, and handmade. Only 1960s kids truly remember what it was like to lift the lid of that warm box and see a pie that tasted like family, tradition, and home. It wasn't just dessert. It was the smell of being young in Canada. Kraft caramel cubes, the original 1960s, chewy classics. If you were a kid in 1960s Canada, Kraft caramel cubes weren't just candy, they were a tiny test of strength. Those little golden squares came wrapped in thin wax paper, stacked neatly in a bag your parents usually hid on the top shelf of the pantry. The moment you unwrapped one, you could smell the thick caramel, dense, buttery, and richer than anything made today. And biting into it, that was the real challenge. The original 1960s formula was firm, really firm. You didn't chew it so much as soften it until your jaw could finally win the battle. Kids would sit on the school steps during recess, warming them in their palms or leaving them in their pockets so they'd soften just enough. The caramel stuck to your teeth, stretched into long strings when you pulled it apart, and sometimes lasted a whole 5 minutes before it finally melted on your tongue. Moms used them for baking, to melting them down for squares, popcorn balls, or special Sunday treats. If you walked into a kitchen and smelled that deep caramel simmering on the stove, you knew something good was coming. There was nothing artificial about it. No shortcuts. It tasted like real butter, real sugar, real childhood. By the 1970s, the recipe shifted. Softer, sweeter, lighter. Easier to bite, maybe, but not the same. The original cubes had a personality, a stubbornness, a weight that modern candy just doesn't have. Only 1960s kids remember the strain in your jaw and the slow, warm reward afterward. Those little caramel squares weren't just candy. They were a piece of 1960s Canada you could fit in your pocket. Seafoam candy, the old-style Canadian version. If you were a kid in 1960s Canada, you remember that moment when you bit into a piece of seafoam candy, and it almost felt like the whole thing disappeared on your tongue. Seafoam back then wasn't just a treat, it was a tiny miracle. The outside was coated in a thin layer of real chocolate that cracked softly between your teeth. And inside was that golden honeycomb center, airy, crunchy, and impossibly light, yet somehow still sticky enough to cling to your molars. Small Canadian candy shops made it by hand in the 60s. You could actually watch the process if you were lucky. Boiling sugar bubbling on the stove, the shopkeeper stirring it until it hissed and foamed up like something alive, then pouring it onto a metal tray where it hardened into warm, honey-scented slabs. Kids crowded the counter, waiting for the pieces that were still slightly warm, the edges uneven. Dusted with a bit of sugar, the first bite always surprised you, a gentle crack. Then, a hollow crunch that echoed inside your mouth. It tasted like caramelized sugar, bonfire nights, and childhood freedom. And when you were done, your fingers were covered in tiny crumbs of honeycomb that melted the moment they touched your tongue. By the late 1970s, the old handmade seafoam candy started disappearing. Factories tried to recreate it, but it was never the same, less airy, less crackly, less magical. Only 1960s kids remember the real version, the one that shattered into sweet dust the moment you took a bite. It wasn't just candy, it was a little piece of Canadian wonder. Old Dutch full grease chips, the original tallow-cooked version. If you were a Canadian kid in the 1960s, you remember the sound before the taste. That soft whoosh as you opened a bag of Old Dutch chips, followed by a smell so rich and savory, it could fill an entire room in seconds. These weren't today's lighter, cleaner chips. The original Old Dutch were cooked in beef tallow, and every bite tasted unmistakably deep, salty, and unapologetically greasy. The chips themselves were thicker and had that golden, uneven color, some edges darker, some pieces bubbled like tiny fried shells. When you reached into the bag, your fingers came out shiny, coated in a warm layer of tallow that made everything you touched afterwards leave a little print. Nobody minded. That was part of the charm. You'd wipe your hands on your jeans or the back of your jacket and keep eating. Corner stores stacked the bags in metal, wire racks that rattled every time a kid grabbed one. On the walk home, you'd crinkle the bag open and share with friends, each of you digging for the dark ones, the pieces with the most flavor. And the crunch, it wasn't a crisp snap like today. It was a heavy, satisfying crack that let you know you were eating something real. Parents brought them to picnics, birthday parties, hockey games, and long summer drives. They tasted like road trips, like weekends, like freedom. The smell lingered in the car long after the bag was empty, mixing with the scent of vinyl seats and warm sun. But as regulations and cooking oils changed in the 1970s, the original formula faded. Healthier, lighter oils replaced the tallow, and that unmistakable richness vanished forever. Today's chips are good, but they don't have that same heavy, nostalgic soul. Only 1960s kids remember the real Old Dutch chips, bold, greasy, smoky, and unforgettable. A taste from another Canada. Mackintosh Toffee, the original pre-1970s formula. If you were a kid in 1960s Canada, you didn't just eat Mackintosh Toffee, you worked for it. The bar came wrapped in thick red and jello paper, and inside was a slab of toffee so hard you practically needed tools to break it. Most families had their own ritual, placing the bar on the kitchen counter and smashing it with a rolling pin, a hammer, or even the heel of a shoe. The sound echoed through the whole house, and every kid ran to the kitchen to grab a piece before the adults could portion it out. The original formula had a deep, almost smoky caramel flavor, the kind that stuck to your teeth and warmed your whole mouth as it slowly softened. Kids kept chunks in their pockets during winter, letting body heat melt them just enough to chew. Teachers kept them in desk drawers as secret rewards, and parents packed them into candy bags at Halloween, where they instantly became the most traded item on the playground. On cold Canadian afternoons, you'd bite into a piece and feel it resist before finally giving way, stretching like warm molasses. The taste wasn't overly sweet. It had a richness that felt old-fashioned, like something made with patience and real ingredients. You could suck on one piece for minutes, letting the flavor build and coat your tongue. But in the early 1970s, the recipe changed. Softer, sweeter, easier. It didn't require the smash, the ritual, the wait. Some kids preferred it, but anyone who grew up in the 60s knew something had been lost. The charm, the fun, the identity. Smashing a bar of Mackintosh Toffee wasn't just candy, it was a family event, a memory, a sound you never forget. Only 1960s Canadian kids remember the real Mackintosh experience, a toffee that fought back, and a flavor that tasted like childhood. Maple leaf deviled ham spread a lunchbox, classic of the 1960s. If you were a kid in 1960s Canada, you remember the tiny round tin of maple leaf deviled ham sitting on the kitchen counter. The can was small enough to fit in a child's hand, wrapped in that unmistakable red and white label. And when your mom pulled the metal tab and peeled it back, the smell drifted through the room, instantly salty, smoky, slightly spicy, and strangely comforting. It was the scent of school lunches, picnics, Saturday afternoons, and long car trips across the province. Deviled ham wasn't fancy, it didn't need to be. Your parents spread it generously onto soft slices of Wonder Bread, folding them into simple sandwiches that were then wrapped in wax paper. By lunchtime, the bread had absorbed a little of the ham spread's flavor, making the edges soft and warm. Every 1960s kid remembers opening their lunchbox to that familiar smell. Mixed with apples, thermos soup, and the faint metallic scent of the lunchbox itself, it was a staple at family picnics too. Your dad would drop a spoonful onto crackers, while your mom unpacked the cooler. The spread's texture was smooth, but dense, with just enough spice to give it personality without making it overwhelming. And for plenty of families, it was an affordable treat during a time when budgets were tight, but meals were still made with care. Beaver tail, fry bread, the early Ottawa street version. If you grew up in Canada in the 1960s, you remember when beaver tail fry bread wasn't a brand, a franchise, or a festival staple. It was something far simpler and far more magical. Long before the modern versions covered in toppings and sauces, the original fry bread was sold by small vendors along Ottawa's street swarm, heavy, rustic pieces of dough fried right in front of you. Kids would gather around the cart or booth, watching the vendor stretch the dough by hand, pulling it into that unmistakable tail shape. The dough wasn't perfectly smooth or uniform. It was uneven, a little lumpy, made with simple ingredients. When it hit the oil, you could hear the soft sizzle, and the smell drifted for half a block. Rich, warm, comforting. Fried dough and winter air. There was nothing like it. The vendor would lift the bread out with metal tongs, letting the excess oil drip back into the pan. Then came the best part. He'd sprinkle a mix of cinnamon and coarse sugar onto it while it was still piping hot. The sugar melted slightly, clinging to the fried surface, forming a warm, grainy crust that stuck to your fingers the moment you took your first bite. The original beaver tail tasted heavier, doughier, and far more homemade than anything you'll find today. No fancy flavors, no Nutella, no score bits, no apple pie topping. Just fried dough, heat, sugar, and the cold Canadian winter biting at your cheeks as you stood outside eating it with both hands. Teen burger, the original 1960s recipe. If you were a Canadian kid in the 1960s, you remember the teen burger long before it became the polished modern version we know today. Back then, it tasted like something homemade, messier, juicier, heavier, and filled with the unmistakable flavor of the classic drive-in era. A&W wasn't just a restaurant. It was an experience. The place where families parked their cars under glowing orange, Signs as car hops skated out with trays you'd hook onto the window. The original teen burger had a flavor that came from real grill smoke. Beef with a little more fat and toppings that were cut thicker, less uniform and full of personality. The bacon was crisp but uneven, curling slightly at the edges. The pickles were tangy and punchy, the lettuce always slightly chilled, and the special sauce cremier, richer and just a little bit peppery, was slathered generously, dripping out the sides as soon as you took your first bite. Kids sat in the back seat, sharing fries and root beer floats while the windows fogged up from the warmth of the food. You'd hear the sound of glass mugs clinking, the buzz of neon signs, and somewhere in the background, the faint hum of a transistor radio playing the Beatles or the Guess Who. Exciting and just rebellious enough for the times. And kids loved it because the teen burger felt huge like real grown-up food. There was something deeper about the flavor too. Maybe it was the ingredients, maybe it was the car hop trays, maybe it was the 1960s itself, a time when fast food still had a homemade heart. By the time the recipe changed in the 70s and 80s, some of that magic disappeared. The burger became cleaner, safer, more consistent. But it lost that smoky, messy drive-in soul. If these forgotten flavors brought back memories you haven't felt in years, you're not alone. The 1960s were filled with simple tastes, simple moments, and a kind of warmth we rarely find today. Share the foods you remember, and let's keep these pieces of Canadian childhood alive, one memory at a time.